Welcome to another episode of Urban Youth Justice Presents, The Color of Education. I'm your host, Ernest Saadiq Morris. Today our special guest is Jose Vilson, a New York City public school teacher, education activist, a recent TED Talk speaker, and a popular education blogger that courageously speaks out about the obstacles to quality public education facing students and teachers. Thanks for joining me, Jose.
Thank you for having me.
Today we'll be discussing teaching in the school and prison pipeline, strategies that you use to empower youth, what makes an effective teacher, from a unique perspective as a Black-Latino male teacher and advocate in one of the largest and most diverse school districts. You've been a teacher for quite a long time, so maybe you can give us your background, but also your activities as an activist.
Well, I've been teaching now for 7 years. I was a math teacher, 6 through 8 to begin with, but about 3 years ago, I started to be a math coach as well, which is basically an instructional coach. I walk around, I try to help teachers. That's my guiding philosophy there. I also got involved with educational activism somewhere around my second, third year teaching when my writing became popular enough and my thoughts became popular enough that people thought I had some credibility in the field. A lot of my beliefs led me to people who had the same beliefs, and ever since then, it's been one wild ride. I've had a lot of different connections, made a lot of good friendships, but most importantly, I think I've helped to shift the discussion about the way we talk about kids. And if I can do that, one reader at a time, that's great. And in some cases, I get to do it 100 readers at a time. So I'm very fortunate in that respect.
Well, it's very interesting. There's a shortage, number one, of male teachers, and in particular, male teachers of color. It seems to me that you would have a unique experience, how it is that you view the students, and maybe how you're able maybe to relate to how the schools in particular deal with male students of color, which we know tend to be the ones that are disproportionately disciplined and actually have the highest dropout rate. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
I think what people really need to understand is that despite whatever movies are out there and whatever we see in the general media, there's really only about 2 to 3% of Black and Latino male educators out there. So there may be a bit of diversity, but not as much as people may think, specifically when it comes to Black and Latino male teachers. As such, I think I do have a privilege of being in the classroom, because what often happens is teachers who are supposed to be teaching a subject get pulled out of the classroom, especially if they're Black and Latino males. They get pulled out of the classroom and they become the deans or the supervisor or even just the disciplinarian as a whole. So it's important for, again, Black and Latino male teachers to be teachers strictly and to be able to have a different relationship than be the ones that have to, I guess, for lack of a better word, imprison them to try to castigate them. Instead, if they're the teachers, then they have to promote their well-being, and they have to promote them as better people and as better students. I think that's my philosophy when it comes to that aspect. I mean, I have a different angle because I'm coming in and I'm trying to promote kids and their well-being versus trying to find all the troublemakers and say, you're the ones that I have to work on all year. It's a different mindset when you're coming in thinking you have to teach math and have to discipline kids.
Yeah, so it sounds to me like even as someone who obviously is well-credentialed and has experience as a teacher and takes pride in teaching skills, you're saying that the system kind of relies upon the few Black and Latino male teachers to take on a security or disciplinary role instead of just being the source of learning. That seems to me that kind of an unfair balance, not just for you, but for your regular students in your classroom. Would you feel that way?
That's exactly right. And I often find that the students who have parole officers in my classroom, those parole officers all tend to be Black and Latino males. The people who come in to teach, the people who are checking security at the high schools, the people who are scanning for weapons, most of them tend to be Black and Latino males. And yet, when we look inside the classrooms, they're English teachers, they're social studies teachers, they're math teachers. We're not seeing very many Black and Latino males at all. And that's a huge issue because the latest research shows that when you have somebody who at least looks like you within your general sphere who at least has some sort of semblance to your experience, then you tend to improve academically. And that's a big deal for me. That it makes a lot of sense as well.
Yeah, definitely. People tend to talk about the lack of positive role models, and it seems to me that's almost become like a status quo in terms of, we always talk about positive, behavior supports in school, and one of those things actually would be to value education. But if you're Black or Latino male student, and really the people that look like you are also the people that tend to discipline you or, in your mind, harass you or make school unpleasant, it doesn't sound to me like there's much positive incentive for those students to want to be at the school, number one, but also to identify with the people that look like them at school.
That's
right.
Kind
of interesting. Yeah, that's kind of interesting. Okay, well, actually, that leads me to one of the things I always like to bring up in terms of school-to-prison pipeline as someone who's interested in dismantling it from the school side. School-to-prison pipeline starts in the classroom, and it seems to me like people always act like discipline comes out of a vacuum. One of the issues that I would like, maybe you to, lend your perspective on is, my observation or the observation of others as well, that sometimes or oftentimes classroom management, when you're talking about a lack of diversity in the classroom, say most of your teachers are white female, statistics show that, across the nation, white females tend to be the majority of the teachers that are in the schools. Do you think that there is some way the lack of diversity is reflected in how classrooms are managed when you're dealing with students of color, in particular male students of color? Is that something that shows up in terms of discipline or how teaching pedagogy is used?
Wow, that's an amazing question. I think I'll start off with this, and maybe that'll help us work our way down through this really dense question. I think it's important for teachers who come into the classroom, especially teachers who come in to a setting where the kids don't necessarily understand their experience, to come in not just with an open mind, but an open heart. And I mean that in the most sincere way possible. It seems to me that teachers who come in already feeling some sort of hostile way and or that they feel that the kids are somehow beneath them, thus they have to save them, already are at a disadvantage versus those teachers who come in with a good understanding of the role they're playing and that they're willing to just get in, listen a bit, and then set the ground rules for their relationship. I think a lot of teachers come in thinking that they're going to save all these kids and they're going to teach them how to be frank, as white as they are. And, and that's not the way that's not the way we're going to get anywhere. So what often happens is that the kids who don't make it into the white as they are category get castigated, and again they pushed to the fringes. They get thrown out of class, and they get told that they're not worth anything, and thus they're just going to go to prison and or flip burgers and or fill my gas tank. And it sets a tone that says we have kids who are desirable and those who don't. If they're passive, if they're willing to just think inside my box, then they're good. But if they're off the fringes, or if they don't fit my mold of what I think a nice little kid of color should be, then I don't really want them, and they're not desirable.
It makes me also wonder in terms of the need for culturally relevant teaching practices and materials in the classroom. I think one of the things that tends to noted is missing among students of color and definitely communities of color is the idea that school should be somewhat adaptable and still teach core subjects, as we call them, in a competent way, but they should be adaptable to or made culturally relevant to the students that they serve. And I often wonder if that's something that you feel you're allowed to do as a teacher, or is it just kind of like the default that we're going to teach from the same perspective we've always taught, which, as you kind of mentioned, might be more of a European perspective?
Great question. Here's this. I think there's a sort of tendency now to try to limit teachers to how far they can go with the curriculum. And they're trying to make it as tight as possible so we can, quote-unquote, raise test scores and compete internationally, which I think is, frankly, it's a load of crock. If only because we don't really address the external matters like, poverty and particularly child poverty where we're just sorely lacking, and of course it's affecting our most in-need children. But that's beside the point. Lisa Delpit, as you're probably aware, wrote the book Other People's Children, and that seems to be trending a lot lately because that sort of mentality is coming back where, at the very least, teachers who are in that setting with kids of color ought to teach kids how to work in a culture that is not necessarily there. At least be able to arm them with the tools of the language. And that is to say, we're not just going to teach them skills. Like, we're not going to just teach them how to multiply and how to divide, and that's it. Like, give them the 4 basic operations, because that in and of itself is jail pedagogy, in the sense that, you're only good enough to read, write, and do arithmetic on a very basic level versus being able to compete with everybody else. What we're trying to say is this is how you code switch. This is how you work with others. This is how the world works. And it may be different from your culture, but we're going to explain it to you in the clearest terms possible. And you could keep your culture, but you also need to be able to work in this culture, because that's the way that you're going to survive. And I think that's the first step in really making, a revolutionary sort of pedagogy, in the sense that we need to be able to understand, or should I say, we should be able to understand the master's tools. We're not going to use them, but at the very least, understand how they work, and then go from there.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I would also, just to make sure that people understand out there, I think we are saying that teachers need to do more to be able to speak in that language that their students speak in, that teachers should also be provided some type of development, right? Some kind of development training. We're not saying that if you're not from the culture, you shouldn't be teaching in that particular neighborhood. It sounds to me like teachers actually need to be provided support and tools to reach all children, instead of just the children that show up that are already prepared by their past experiences to accept this new way of thinking or the standard status quo in school. I mean, is that something that you feel that some teachers need, is maybe some more help and support and understanding?
Yeah, it needs to start right from jump. Like, it needs to be part of the curriculum for teachers and teacher prep. Like, there needs to be people within that sector of things that says you may not just be teaching quote unquote normal kids. You're going to have a range of experiences and a range of understandings and a range of intelligences that work to different effect. And any combination of things can get you a kid who works very well in your system and a kid who doesn't work as well in your system. And if you can get 95% of your kids, you are doing an excellent job. Even if you're getting if you're reaching 75% of those kids, great. But if you're only reaching a few of them, at least on some sort of level, then we need to rework everything. And here's how. Let's start off with, cultural relevance. Like, what does it mean for them? Let's start off with actually trying to, heighten up the standards, the expectation for them. Wes Moore, in his book, The Other Wes Moore, discusses how the jailed Wes Moore actually said that it wasn't so much that there was a culture of poverty, but a culture of lower expectations. Having people who don't think that they can do more than they have already been set out to do, according to whoever. And I understand that there's this system that we have currently, there's going to be winners and losers, but it's not even close to equitable at this point.